The recent abduction of Libya's Prime Minister Ali Zidane by militiamen brought to the fore a deadly struggle within the country's fragile government and exposed a new dilemma for post-Gadaffi Libya, that of armed militia groups. But in which ways is post-revolution Libya still evolving, and what is the role of armed non-state actors in this delicate transition? Well, joining us from Cairo is Zayed Akil, a researcher at the Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. From Washington, D.C., Todd Ruffner, POMED's Advocacy Associate, that's a project on Middle Eastern democracy. And in studio here with me, I'm being joined by Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, the Director, Arigato International. Welcome to the program today. Well, but first, let's take a look at Libya's militia problem and why it could complicate the country's transition.
2 years after the revolution that ousted Muammar Gaddafi, the Libyan government is still struggling to solve security problems across the country. The recent kidnapping of the Prime Minister is an example of how far it has to go in its efforts to restore law and order. Close connections between some of the armed militias and political groups in the National Congress make the situation more complex.
Weapons and force, which is in the street, bigger 1,000 times more than weapon which is in the government hands. So when you are weak, you cannot rule. So the secret is that Zidane or anybody will be in his place. He cannot rule the country because he doesn't have force.
The Libyan government exercises little control over the situation, and until the various groups agree to submit to the authority of a central government and lay down their weapons, power will remain fragmented among the revolutionary brigades.
How come you are a congressman and you have a militia? So when we discuss any point, you don't like my opinion, so you might threaten me with your militia.
Libyans are still waiting for an official national army and police force to emerge along with a stable government. It's taking longer than expected.
All right, there are reports that Libya is slowly sliding into anarchy. Let me start off with you first, Zayed. It has been 2 years since the killing of Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi. It was expected that the country would have a new democratic situation there. That has not happened. What went wrong?
Well, I think what mainly is wrong is the absence of a real state as we rationally conceive of it, and a very, very poor performance from the government that basically suffers from a legitimacy problem and a sovereignty problem. And amidst all the multiple sovereignties that exist in Libya, it's actually very, very difficult to imagine the rise of a democratic process or even a democratic institution. So I believe simply that what the real wrong is how Libya lacks fundamental requirements until now for a democratic process to take place.
All right, you talk of Libya lacking, or the Libyan authorities lacking legitimacy there. Why do they lack that legitimacy?
Well, simply because they do not represent every single group in Libya, and the groups that they do not represent, they do not have the sufficient resources to actually make them believe in this government and these authorities as law enforcement organisms. So basically, for example, you would find a lot of the members of the different militias are actually people who were ex-lobbyists of Muammar Gaddafi. And these people have interests that are not represented by the current authorities, and simply the current authorities does not have the enough sovereignty to make these groups sort of accept or be at least obedient within or tolerant within a democratic political framework.
All right, Todd, to you in Washington, though, the country is now flooded with weapons. Violence is a common phenomenon there. Zayed says authorities there lack legitimacy. Just how stable or unstable is Libya today, 2 years after the end of Muammar Gaddafi?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I think it's hard to qualify exactly how stable or unstable it is. I definitely think this is going to be a pivotal few weeks, few months for Libya to see where things go. if Zaidan is able to maybe consolidate a few small political victories and show that he's not completely lost legitimacy, then maybe there's a chance that his government can move forward slowly but hopefully surely. If things like we saw a few weeks ago with his abduction keep happening, then I think things could potentially get much worse, and that there are a lot of entrenched interests with these militia groups, economic interests and trafficking and of weapons and drugs and even people. So there's a lot at stake for a lot of these groups. So they're not going to just sort of obey the government without a show of force or without some sort of compromise being reached. So there's certainly a lot of variables going forward.
We're already talking, though, Todd, we're already talking about 1,700 different militias there operating in Libya. How much worse can it get, though?
Well, I mean, it could get worse in the sense that you could see a full-scale civil war. Right now, you see a lot of mostly localized violence and targeted killings, assassinations of military figures, but we haven't seen a wider scale set of fighting. So I mean, it could certainly get worse, and I try to be optimistic for Libya. I do think it has a lot of characteristics that are very positive that could help it consolidate a democratic transition, but it's going to take some time. And if the security situation keeps getting worse, then I think it's really going to undermine those prospects. All
right, Dr. Mustafa, what's your reading on this, though? Is this still about the revolution?
The situation in Libya is not good. One is, as one of the speakers has mentioned, that Libya does not have strong state institutions. And even before Gadaffi went down, Libya never had strong state institutions. And therefore, the vacuum that has been there and is now there has been filled by these militias. Now, unless the competing interests by these militias, which are religious, tribal, national and regional, are addressed, these militias are still going to hold sway, and they will refuse to be part of the national government, and they will want to control their various regions or protect certain kind of ideology that they believe should inform governance in Libya.
What is it, though, that the militias want?
Militias, a part of the militias want to have a system that they believe in terms of the national governance. For example, the Shield Brigade that is there, they want to have a government that is based on Islamic principles. Then you have the secular groups that also they have their own militias. You have the tribal militias based in Benghazi and those that are based in Tripoli. People in Benghazi, residents in Benghazi, feel that they want to have a kind of a semi-autonomous region that then can federate with the groups in Tripoli to form Libya, because during Gaddafi's time and even now, they feel that they're really not part of the national government.
All right. Zayed, let me come to you, though, in Cairo and stay with this situation with the militias for the moment, though. 1,700 different groups of them. Where are they getting their legitimacy from? They seem to have overrun the country.
Well, simply they are getting their legitimacy from the vacuum that the Libyan central government cannot fulfill. They are getting their legitimacy like we just heard from, sometimes from ethnic sources, sometimes from political ones, sometimes basically because their presence serves a bigger matrix or network of interests. So the fact is that their main legitimacy is how they can fulfill what the state cannot, or what the state never actually did fulfill. I do agree that Libya never had a state like we usually talk about, and even Muammar al-Gaddafi's elite is no longer in power. However, the new elite is not capable of creating itself within state institutions. So really, the source of legitimacy is just the amount of confusion that the central government is still dealing with until today. And if this continues for maybe another year with the very same pace, we will very, very soon be witnessing independence calls. And mark my words, very soon we will have a militia declaring an independent southern part of Libya and an independent, probably eastern part of Libya as well.
But the government, though, has tried to co-opt some of the militia, though, some of the people into the security services. Is this working?
I don't think it's working. I don't think that so far, of course, the number of the militias keeps increasing. The complexity and the sophistication of the different attacks by the militias keeps increasing as well. I believe the government did not offer either enough or sufficient motivation or did not create a real alternative path for these people to gain the same amount of influence and make the same amount of money that they can make in a militia. So the government, yes, maybe we can say that they had goodwill, but when you want to let people give their arms, when you are in a political and a possibly violent battle, you need a lot more than goodwill. You do need an element of political power, an element of coercion, which never existed in the Libyan central government.
All right, we're hearing all of this, though, Dr. Mustafa, and recently, of course, the Prime Minister Zidane was also kidnapped and released subsequently, though. Who exactly then is in control of Libya?
Well, the current government is nominally in control, but the power in most areas in Libya is in the hands of the militia. And just to emphasize what Ziad said is that most of these militias are the ones who are really calling the shots. The government tried to absorb all these militias into some kind of a national army. But what happened is that the government started paying their salaries, and in a sense, these militias decided that you pay our salaries, but we are not going to report to you. We are not going to be under your command. And what has happened is that the government has actually empowered the militias without controlling them.
Empowered the militia, so how is the government going to regain control? It has to,
they have to engage on a national process. And to bring back all these militias, the first thing is the legitimacy of the central government. If the militias believe that their interests are going to be taken care of by the central government, then they are going to submit to the central government. And this is the only way to do this. A political process that is inclusive, that all the militias, I don't believe that all militias are going to be party of this, but most of the militia groups, particularly the strong ones, the powerful ones, will want to be a part of this political process.
All right. Ziad, the economy at the moment, though, is getting quite crippled there with all the militia now controlling, we understand, about 60% of Libya's oil revenues. How is the government handling that situation? How is the government operating without that revenue, and also in regard to its programs? How is it funding its programs?
Well, apparently the government is not really administering this situation very well, because the Libyan economy keeps underperforming. And I simply believe that what the government is trying to do is reach some kind of a middle ground between the militias, so that there would be some kind of a political negotiation and some kind of an acceptance by the government for the fact that there's a part of this economy controlled by the militias, meaning that the government seems to be wanting to reach an agreement where it acknowledges that a part of the oil is controlled by the militias, but somehow they want to create a national interest out of that part.
All right. Todd, a final one there to you, though. The country's prime minister recently called on Western powers to help it deal with what he called that militancy in his country. How is that, though, being received there in the United States?
Well, you know, in the United States, since the attacks in Benghazi in 2012, the conversation has been stilted in a lot of ways. And you know, there has been a mobilization of some money and training assistance and just general security assistance that has been helpful, I think, for Libya. But it's been on a pretty small scale. And I think that when the security or conversation is had, especially in Washington, a lot of people tend to throw up their hands and say that it's too complicated. But I think if you look at what a lot of international bodies and other states, including many European states and the EU, have done, is that they've thrown considerable resources behind helping Libya secure its borders and engage in counterterrorism. But what we haven't seen is a sort of a consistent and coordinated effort by a lot of these bodies. So there's a lot of money, there's a lot of programs going, but we haven't seen sort of short-term gains from these programs.
All right, Todd Ruffner joining us from Washington, Zayed Akil in Cairo, and Dr. Mustafa Ali here in Nairobi. Do stay with us, gentlemen. We'll return to this program in a moment.
Culture expressed. See the world in color.
Make major investments in China.
In China,
why we are living for.
That's a fundamental government
Position on China's
By leaders.
I think that's frustration. Political change and human rights.
Don't you think you
human rights?
Dialogue. Ideas matter.
All right, welcome back to the program. So what's the danger of a weak and fragmented Libya, and why should Africa and the international community be worried? Well, still with us on the program from Cairo is Zayed Akil, a researcher at the Ahram Center for Political and Strategic Studies. From Washington, Todd Ruffner, POMED's Advocacy Associate. And in studio with me, Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, the Director, Arigato International. Gentlemen, welcome back to the program. First to you, Todd, in Washington. Libya now seems to have been plunged into its worst political and economic crisis since the end of Muammar Gadaffi. It seems to have gone there quite unnoticed. The international community has put its interest in Egypt and not Libya. Why is that?
I think there's a few reasons. Mostly, or at least from the United States perspective, is that Egypt is sort of the linchpin and the leader, or at least historically has been, for the Arab world. So the interests there are not only more obvious, but are more entrenched historically. I think we've only really had the past 2 years to sort of put Libya back on our radar, and I think slowly but surely Washington is realizing that Libya, even though it's not as significant population-wise or economically maybe that Egypt is, I think people are starting to realize, as far as security is concerned, it could be a linchpin for instability throughout Africa and much of the Middle East. So I think that slowly there is attention going to that issue. But still, the bulk of the attention remains on Egypt, and I think that will be the case, for the foreseeable future, just because of the importance of Israel's foreign policy and that relationship with the United States.
All right, Dr. Mustafa, the West is largely ignoring Libya as it slides slowly into anarchy.
This is a huge mistake that the West has done after the removal of Gaddafi. One, we did see the effects of Libya and the militias that emanated from Libya and the arms that came out of Libya after the death of Gaddafi happening in Mali. Most of the Tuaregs who actually constituted the individuals who were fighting alongside the Gaddafi group went back into Mali and Niger and Mauritania with sophisticated weaponry. It took French to intervene for the Malian government not to fall. And we are seeing a similar situation in quite a number of countries in the Sahelian region. We can in many ways compare Libya to Somalia in the early 1990s when the government of Siad Barre was taken out and he had to flee. The warlords that we saw those days in the 90s are the militias that we are seeing today. Libya is extremely tribal, as it has been in Somalia. And if then this situation is not arrested now, if the militias and the groups that are holding sophisticated arms in Libya are not reined in now and included or put on notice or that demobilized, then Libya might fall in the same category as Somalia has, a failed state.
But there are some lessons, though, that should have been learned from military incursions into the various countries, going by the situation in Iraq, going by the situation in Somalia, you know, rebuilding a state after a military intervention. Why has this been ignored?
As Todd has mentioned, there isn't much interest in Libya as we see today. A lot of interest is on Egypt, and because of the geopolitical position that Egypt occupies in the Middle East and North Africa. And as I said earlier, this is a mistake. A situation as we are seeing now in Libya could just get out of control and is going to cost the entire international community, particularly the Europeans. And it is more important for Europeans to take action in Libya and help that country to actually get back to its feet.
All right, Isaiah, what impact, though, is that lawlessness in the militia situation and the lawlessness in Libya, what impact is that having on the wider region?
Well, it has definitely a lot of effects. It's starting already to show very problematic signs in Egypt. There is already problems on the Egyptian-Libyan border. Egypt has sealed the crossing at Saloum. Arms are starting to spread to different countries in the region, and at the same time, Libya, with its very massive geographic strategic landscape, is starting to also to attract members of organized violence groups that are looking basically for a place to train and a place to build an infrastructure for them. So these are threats that were going to be very, very serious to all the regional partners of Libya in the very near future.
Dr. Mustafa, let me come there to you with this situation. How is Africa reacting, though, to that whole situation with Libya? Because Africa has been very engaged with the situation in Egypt, the situation in DRC, with the situation in Somalia at the moment. How is it reacting to that situation in Libya?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see much engagement by either the African Union or censored or countries in North Africa trying to help or intervene in the worsening situation in Libya. And the obvious reason for this is that most countries in North Africa are facing quite some significant challenges to their own internal security. And Egypt would have been one of those countries that would have actually intervened in Libya by offering its good offices to try and bring together the militias, the tribal groups, and the government, and help them form a government. Egypt is a country that has that has quite a number of professionals that can actually help Libya, but this is not happening because Egypt itself is in dire straits.
All right, Zayed, in Cairo, Egypt and the regions, the countries there in North Africa, not doing much to help Libya, is that the case?
Well, yes, of course, and it's not. On one hand, they need to be involved in this situation because it affects them directly, really, and it affects them in a very, very important sense. But at the same time, they are in a political situation that does not allow them really to be an effective, to have an effective involvement in this situation. So the case really is there is a lot of potential help that Libya could have gotten, but is not getting simply because of the political reality in which the region is in right now.
All right. How is Libya, though, at the moment relating with Egypt, given that both countries had undergone that state of revolution?
Well, right now, of course, the Egyptian state is going through a lot of uncertainties and a process simply of just reconstruction. So I believe that this is reflecting heavily on how it reflects its regional interests, and specifically those with Libya, because what is happening right now because of the militia case in Libya is how Egyptian army is starting to raise the issue of rethinking border security policies with Libya, which means that there is a core military policy that is about to be changed because of that's about to be changed in Egypt because of the situation in Libya, and this with the state of uncertainty in which the Egyptian state is in right now is actually a very sensitive situation, which would really sort of limit the positive influence that Egypt could have in Libya right now.
All right, Dr. Mustafa, of course, there are some lessons that are being learned now from the Libyan situation pre-Gaddafi and post-Gaddafi. What are they?
First of all, that it's quite important for any country to have functioning state institutions. And Libya did not have functioning or properly functioning state institutions during Gaddafi's time. It's incumbent upon the current leadership to concentrate all their efforts to establish and promote and enable functioning, strong state institutions. Without this, you will continue to see the militias having a field day in many parts of Libya.
All right. Zayed Akil, you have the final comment on the program now. The lessons being learned from Libya's pre-Gaddafi era and post-Gaddafi Libya.
There's definitely, there will be a lot of those telling you that the Gaddafi era was a very secure era with successful Libyan economy and somehow stable relations in the world economy, in the world different organizations. But Gaddafi's real cost is what we're witnessing in the post-Gaddafi phase, that basically there's absolutely no structures for the state to depend on. There's absolutely a lot of work to be done basically to just undo what Muammar al-Qaddafi's era did in Libya. And the real problem really is that back in 2011, I think everyone drew a very optimistic and a very perfectionist image of how this transition to democracy will be. And 2 years later, everybody is just realizing that this is not what we paid the ticket for. And the thing is that simply all the harm that's been done in the Arab world for the past 30 or 40 years by these undemocratic regimes is something, and also the pattern of the different revolutions in the Arab Spring is something else. After all, they were mostly political revolutions, not social revolutions, which means that they depend on a political process, which takes time to build, which takes time to create and translate into laws and legislations. So I think it's too soon to judge the post-Gaddafi phase of Libya. We're in the very, very beginning of that phase, and it would not be fair to actually say that right now we can reach an objective conclusion of where exactly does Libya stand in both phases.
All right, gentlemen, we'll leave it there for the moment. Dr. Mustafa Yusuf Ali, Director, Arigato International. And from Cairo, Zayed Akil, a researcher at the Akram Center for Political and Strategic Studies, and in Washington, D.C., Todd Ruffner, POMED's Advocacy Associate. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here on Talk Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Bye-bye from us.